My name is Anthony Mallard, and I'm going to be giving a brief description of the film 13 Days and its relationship to historical events. The film 13 Days is based on the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962. The movie's point of view is solely that of the Kennedy administration, with an emphasis on President Kennedy himself, his brother Robert, and Kenneth O'Donnell. Hardly an action movie, the film goes behind the scenes of the crisis and follows the conversations between the Joint Chief of Staff. We are shown the tremendous pressure placed on Kennedy as his advisors gear up for World War III against the president's instinct. As intelligence comes through that the Soviets are stockpiling missiles in Cuba, Kennedy and his advisors are immediately thrown into a panic as to what actions should be taken. As scenarios and options are laid on the table, the threat of nuclear war is becoming more and more prominent. The film displays President Kennedy's peaceful nature and ambition to avoid war at all costs. As the days go by and more intelligence is received, Kennedy juggles his political obligations with dealing with the crisis, trying not to cause a national panic. President Kennedy is kept down to earth by Robert and Kenny O'Donnell as he's pushed closer and closer to a military attack on Cuba by his military advisors and a small part of himself. Kennedy orders a blockade of Cuba with the support of the UN Council. After a somewhat successful blockade, Kennedy is still faced with the surface missile problem and the ever-likely nuclear war. The film climaxes with Kennedy negotiating a peaceful covert deal at the last minute. The missiles are to be removed from Cuba if American missiles are removed from Turkey in 6 months' time. The film is strictly seen from the American point of view, with no input from the Soviets, Cubans, or other world figures. The film is obviously related to the 13 days in which the Cuban Missile Crisis takes place. It is the only event it relates to and shows nothing that leads up to the crisis or the aftermath. The film is very selective, as it leaves out the Soviet side and the Cuban side of the story. It does not set up the crisis with vital information. It merely captures the raw emotion and tactics of the administration. After reading Stern's Cuban Missile Crisis in American Memory, it seems the timeline of events in the movie are accurate. But the movie is not about the timeline, it is about the actions of the Joint Chief of Staff. This is where historical accuracy comes into question. As documents become declassified and more information available, it appears as though the truth is slightly fabricated in order to portray some members to be more or less responsible for the success. The film is in line with Robert Kennedy's rendition of events and not the declassified XCOM tapes, which would prove to be much better source material. The film does not even recognise that conversations were being recorded. The movie also fails to portray Soviet and Cuban events which would impact the crisis, and a lot of questions are left unanswered. Why did the Soviets place the missiles there? What was the Soviet-Cuban relationship, and were their actions justifiable? Stern also argues that the actions undertaken by Robert Kennedy and Kenny O'Donnell are exaggerated in both the book and the movie 13 Days to improve their role and judgment during the crisis.